Given the recent political upheaval in Ironforge, the gnomes have suddenly found themselves unwelcomed guests within the city. Leveraging their ingenious technologies and unquenchable spirit for adventure, the gnomes have begun to reevaluate their role within Cosmodan. Under the inventive leadership of High Tinker Gelbin Mechatork, the gnomes now plan a daring campaign against the barbarous Trogs to retake their former capital of Gnomregon. With the odds stacked against them, the gnomes are counting on brave heroes such as you to stand and be counted.
Hello guys, this is Don's Movies, and today I got another World of Warcraft RP guide. So in this video, I will be teaching you how to roleplay a gnome and pretty much helping you set everything up. So first and most importantly, we will go over their lore, even though it's not that wide itself. Although I will only cover the basics and I won't be going into like crazy details. But if you want to learn more about it, you can check out the video I did with Danger Dolan about Gelbin Mechatork, as that covers a lot of the gnomish lore. So I will have the annotation for the video at the top, so you can just click it to check that out and learn a bit more about their lore in more detail. And after that, I will give you a bit of an insight into their culture, help you name your character, give you some example personalities, and also cover their classes. So without further ado, let's just get into their lore. So not much is known of their early history, but the only thing we do know is that they were once called Mecha Gnomes and were created by the Titan Watcher Mimiron, most likely because he needed reliable helpers, so he created them using his own image. Years later, they were affected by the curse, just like many other Titan creations, such as the dwarves and the trogs and all of that. Thus the very first gnomes were created, just like the ones we have today. Now, fast forward about a few hundred years before today, that is the time they first met the dwarves, and soon enough the dwarves and the gnomes became great companions. When the dwarves had just discovered gunpowder, the gnomes already had everything mechanized, all sorts of these crazy mounts, devices, which blew the dwarves away since they shared the same passion for technology and battle machines and all of that, even though they were not that great at it. Now later on they contributed to the Alliance, mostly during the Second War, where they provided them with their own devices such as flying machines, submarines, which helped the battle against the invading horde greatly. However, during the Third War, everything changed when the gnomes couldn't send any help, although the Alliance still had the machines from earlier and all the designs. Now after the battle ended, it was discovered why they couldn't offer any help, and the answer was pretty bad. Now a few years back, Gelbin Mechatork and Seiko Thermaplug were best friends, even though secretly Thermaplug was jealous of Gelbin because he became the High Tinker and he was just the advisor to him, so he actually decided to backstab him one day and a perfect opportunity opened. Now the Trogs came out of nowhere, and it is kinda speculated that Thermaplug had something to do with it, but it's not fully known. And the Trogs, who were actually the first versions of dwarves that were badly affected by the Curse of Flesh, they attacked Gnomregan from within, and Thermaplug had a perfect plan. Now he used toxins in order to get rid of them, and he convinced Gelbin to allow him to do so, because even if a few gnomes died here and there, it would be a worthy sacrifice. But it turns out that wasn't the case. The radiation from the bomb did pretty much everything but kill the Trogs, and the gnomes that it didn't kill, it turned into leper gnomes, which were almost like zombies, and thus wiping out almost the entirety of the gnomish race, and that is pretty much the main reason why there are so few in numbers today. However, with a few operations, Gelbin and his gnomes managed to retake the biggest part of Gnomregan, although today it's still kind of work in progress, and Seiko Thermaplug has been killed as well. Now the gnomes, led by Gelbin Mechatork, are still trying to recover to their former glory, and not much is happening with them right now. That is all there is for the lore. I know it's not much, but as I said, as everyone pretty much knows, that the gnomes have the least lore currently in the game, and could be said to be the least developed race, although that doesn't mean you shouldn't know the little there is. And now let's get a bit of an insight into their culture, their general lifestyle and all of that. Now gnomes, unlike the others, don't really have a super dedicated culture or even like a religion or something they worship or center around. I mean, they're kind of democratic people, even though they still value hierarchy and used to actually have kings, but now since they're not that big in numbers, they have to stick together and help each other out in any way possible. Now they don't really have any sort of like traditions or crazy rituals, and most of their lives are centered around technology, building new stuff, discovering things, and pretty much just generally engineering. Now just like the goblins, they're kind of crazy, although it's not like an old gnome is going to be super calm and wise, but the main difference is they are not really as greedy as the goblins, and if there is profit in something, they will be sure to claim it, of course, but everything kind of has to be mutually beneficial, and they will not like deliver a really bad product and will still keep their part of the deal. Now, their devices are also different to goblins, and they spend a lot more time in planning things and perfecting everything and pretty much fixing it until everything is perfect and polished, while a goblin today would pretty much scrap something together that wouldn't even be reliable or safe and probably would just work on one use. Now, appearance wise, they're kind of just like the goblins and are around 3 feet tall, and in a way they might even look a little like the dwarves, although they're not as sturdy and their heads are not that proportional to their bodies and are kind of larger. And they also have small limbs, so it's kind of like a caricature type of an appearance. Now, until recently, gnomes have always avoided conflict and used their machines to fight for them, although recently, after pretty much life hit them very hard with the fall of Gnomeregan and their numbers stealing, they started getting into melee and being actual warriors, although their lives are not like centered around war and conflict as it would be for the orcs, for example, or some of other more like battle-worthy races. Now, as I mentioned before, gnomes aren't really these super wise creatures, but they are intelligent and they kind of speak like scholars, although unlike the night elves or even some of the humans, they don't really speak in a super fancy language, and pretty much when they talk, they describe what they want in quite a simple manner, still using some technological words and all of that. Now, when it comes to naming your character, it isn't too complex, but it is a bit different. Now, gnomes when they're born are named by their parent, just like any others, but once they turn into adults at around the age of 30, they acquire a surname that is reflecting their own achievements. Now, most of the time their names are childish and consist of different references to technology and include words such as boom or fizz, although it's kind of similar to goblins as well, although goblins might have some more orcish names, if you could say that. So names like Grobnik, Kazboo, Fizzlenik work great for males, while names like Sarasa, Begra work great for females. Also, their last names might go something like Spin Pistol, Great Gear, Mechgineer, etc. Alright, now let's get a bit of an insight into their personalities. Now, as in all of these guides by now, I will only give you a baseline personality type that you should use just as a starting point and work from it, and not really use it as it is, although you can even do that. But if you want to do more serious roleplay, I would suggest thinking of a really good backstory and tying your personality nicely with it. Now, the first personality type is the peaceful one. Now, this one is the perfect gnome that is dedicated to his own work and is quite forgiving towards other races and can make friends with everyone, which is sort of in gnomish nature. Now, this personality could also greatly depend on his own creations, and this gnome can also be very cowardly himself, although he doesn't really like conflict and only gets into it when there is absolutely no other way out. Alright, next one would be the neutral one. Now, this one is quite similar to the first one, although it is a bit more aggressive in a way. I don't mean aggressive as in like combat, but just in the general personality. Now, he might get greedy at some times and also do things he wouldn't do in order to advance himself, although not to like a great extent, as gnomes are generally peaceful people and honest people in nature. Now, this character would also engage in actual combat and not be too scared to rely on just machines, although could still use them to some extent. And the last one I'm going to cover is the crazy one. Now, this one is kind of rare but very fun to play with actually. You can either be this evil mad scientist or just be like a crazy fighter, although that one would be quite rare. Now, with this personality, you don't really care too much about others and you mostly care about your own gain, and are similar to a goblin in a way, both in personality and even in creations, as you can make all these sort of unreliable death machines that might or might not end up well in the end. Alright, that is all there is for the personalities. As I said, these are kind of just guideline personalities that you should work from, and if you want to play a gnome seriously, I would suggest taking some time and figuring out a really good backstory. And lastly, before I end the video, let's go over a few classes. Now, as in all of these guides, I won't be covering all of the classes, and only a few to keep this video to a decent time and to make everything pretty much consistent towards other guides. Although if you want to find out about the rest, you can always research it, I guess, as there are a bunch of guides on the internet. Now, as always, let's start out with the warrior. Now, they are kind of a more recent phenomena and are starting to rise up with the fall of Gnomeregan. This class can be quite interesting to roleplay as, although be careful and don't try to roleplay this like barbarian brute or like a berserker for quite obvious reasons, as it doesn't really fit a gnome. But instead, try to go for more of a smart fighter. You know, being a tank obviously doesn't make sense as in taking like direct damage and withstanding it, but you can be quite dodgy, and especially if the opponent is a lot bigger, it might take a lot more time for him to actually hit you, so a warrior could work quite well for the gnomes. Alright, next one is the rogue. Now this class might be the perfect one for the gnomes, if not the best one. Not really personality wise, but mostly appearance wise, as the gnomes are so tiny and agile and can be great stealth fighters, as they aren't really that easy to spot to begin with. Now you can also be a hired assassin, although gnomes are generally good and honest people by nature, so you can still be a good rogue, something between like a warrior and a rogue that fights for a good cause and uses his, at first sight, limiting attributes to his own advantage. Alright, next one is the gnome warlock. Now probably the best class for you if you want to be this sort of a mad scientist, and it can fit a gnome quite well as they generally handle things bigger than them anyways. Now you don't have to be corrupt and you can always control the demons for the good of all, but it's the best class, as I said, if you want to be like a mad scientist and you can control all of these creations and magic that isn't safe and use it for your own plan for world domination. And the last class I'm going to cover is the mage. Now this one fits the gnomes quite well, as if you're a mage, size doesn't really matter at all, and you can always rely on magic and your own creations, which suits a gnome the best. Now gnomes also like explosions and all sorts of distractions, so shooting fire out of your hands might be good for them as well. And another thing is, usually mages are quite intelligent and gnomes are intelligent as well, so a gnome would make a perfect mage. Alright, that is all there is for the classes. I didn't really cover all of them, and I plan on making a guide after I finish these race guides for like Death Knights. But you can also have a few other classes I left out, such as the priests, which are kind of rare and are mostly using light as medication and aren't really that devoted to the light to become actual like paladins and warriors of the light or anything crazy like that. Alright, that is all I have for this guide. Now this video might be a bit shorter, pun intended, but that is mostly because gnomes as a race aren't really that developed and they don't really have that much lore or like a super big developed culture. Although hopefully they will be in the spotlight in the future and we'll have some more lore added to them. But right now they're kind of underdeveloped, and even when they made World of Warcraft they kinda added them in the last moment. So they aren't really a class with super deep roots, even though lore wise they do have deep roots. Now do leave some feedback on what you think about this guide and which guide would you like to see next, as they only have a few races to cover, so I should finish them by the end of October, hopefully, if I do them every week. Also don't forget to like, favorite and subscribe, as it really helps out the channel and keeps these videos going and all these guides and everything. And also check out my twitch.tv stream, as I stream there a bit more seriously now, a few times a week for a few hours, and you can ask me all sorts of like lore questions and all of that. Anyways, thanks so much for taking your time to watch this video, and see you next time.